Usborne Illustrated Stories from India. Indra's Curse. There was once a man named Thinta who thought himself the luckiest man in the world. His wife Kalavati was breathtakingly beautiful, and she was an apsara, a magical being. One evening, Kalavati came to him brimming with excitement. "I am going up to Devloka tonight," she announced. "There's to be a grand celebration, and all the apsaras have been invited to sing." Thinta's ears pricked up. Devloka was another name for heaven, governed by Indra, the king of the gods. "Rambha will be dancing," Kalavati continued. "You know, the queen of the apsaras? She is so beautiful. I wish you could see her dance. No one is as graceful." "I would love to see her dance," said Thinta. "Why don't I go with you? I can wear my new silk." "Oh no," interrupted Kalavati, panic stricken. "You can't possibly come." "Please," Thinta begged. "I have always wondered what heaven is like, and I promise I wouldn't get in the way. But no mortal is allowed in Devloka. Couldn't you sneak me in?" her husband added. "No, no, I'm sorry, my dearest." Kalavati shook her head. "I would get into terrible trouble if Indra found out. Goodness knows what punishment he would give me." "But what if he didn't find out?" Thinta persisted, and he continued this way all day, asking, begging, and pleading with his wife to take him with her just this once. At last, Kalavati gave in. She shrank Thinta to the size of a caterpillar and hid him inside a lotus flower, which she put in her hair before floating up to Devloka. The evening surpassed all Thinta's expectations. Indra's palace was spectacular. The singing of the apsaras was exquisite, and Rambha danced like a dream. Then a jester in a large headdress strutted into the middle of the room and began a comical dance. To Thinta's amazement, the jester turned himself into a goat and carried on dancing. The dancing goat was the funniest thing Thinta had ever seen. It was all he could do not to burst out laughing. He looked at the goat more closely. "Strange," he thought. "It seems familiar." Eventually, the party came to an end. Back home, Kalavati restored her husband to his normal size, immensely relieved that they hadn't been caught. But the next day, Thinta was at the market when he spotted a goat that looked just like the one he had seen the night before. Rushing up to it, he shouted eagerly, "Dance!" Everyone stared as if he were crazy. The goat simply blinked and continued to chew on an old boot. "Come on, just a few steps," Thinta shouted. The goat continued to ignore him. "Leave the goat alone," called a passerby. "Yes, what's wrong with you?" jeered someone else. "Goats can't dance." Several shoppers started pointing and laughing at the idiot who was asking a goat to dance. Blushing bright red, Thinta hurried home. Soon everyone was talking about the crazy man who had asked a goat to dance, until the news reached Indra himself. He knew at once what Kalavati had done. Furious, he summoned her to Devloka. "How dare you bring your human husband here?" he roared. "Go home and say goodbye to him. Tonight I shall turn you into a pillar of stone, and you will be stuck in the temple until the day it falls down." Kalavati fled in floods of tears, but no amount of tears nor comforting from Thinta could change what Indra had decreed. When Thinta woke the next morning, the house was empty and his wife had gone. He raced to the temple, and there he found her, frozen in the place of a stone pillar. Sobbing, he buried his head in his hands. What could he do? Even if anyone believed his story, why would they knock down such a magnificent building just to rescue her? He was about to give up hope when he had an idea. That evening, he gathered up Kalavati's necklaces and bracelets and divided them between 4 pots. After dark, he went into the town and buried each pot in a different location. The next day, disguised as a holy man, he walked around the town, muttering to himself. Word quickly spread that a holy man had arrived. Even the king heard and came to the town square to meet him. As the king approached, a crow flew overhead and cawed loudly. Thinta looked up and held his hand out to the bird. Thank you, kind crow, thank you, he exclaimed. The king was intrigued. You can understand animals? Thinta nodded. What did it say? The king demanded. Your Majesty, it said that just over there, next to that spy stall, there is buried treasure. Really? Said the king, and nodded to one of his guards to go and dig on the spot Thinta had indicated. Lo and behold, he found a pot filled with jewels. The king was astounded. Thinta smiled modestly and continued on his tour of the town, now with the king in tow. A while later, Thinta stopped just as a jackal howled. What does that mean? The king asked. The jackal says that here, Thinta said, pointing to the ground, there is another pot of treasure. Again, the king told his guard to dig, and again he lifted out a pot of jewels. Even more impressed, the king trotted after Thinta, who had set off once more. It wasn't long before Thinta located a third pot and then a fourth. By this time, they had reached the temple. When they came to the spot where poor Kalavati stood, tears began to stream down her stone face. What's wrong? The king asked, aghast. Thinta, whose eyes were also filled with tears, turned to the king and said, She weeps because you will die very soon. The king was horrified. Unless, Thinta paused, unless you knock down the temple, you build the temple on unlucky ground. But if you knock it down, you will live. Then the temple must be demolished at once, declared the king. By sunset, the temple was a pile of rubble, and out of the dust walked a lonely figure, Kalavati. Thinta was overjoyed. His plan had worked. When Indra heard, he roared with laughter. If such deceit had demanded punishment, such cleverness surely deserved a reward. So he summoned the couple to heaven, where they lived like a god and goddess for the rest of their days. Thank you.